In May 1941, following their conquest of mainland Greece, the German military launched an airborne assault on the island of Crete. As fierce fighting raged on land, a Royal Navy fleet fought hard to prevent any Axis reinforcements from reaching the island by sea, in the face of a series of massive air attacks from hundreds of German and Italian aircraft. It was a battle that would push the Royal Navy to breaking point. On the morning of May 22, 1941, the bulk of the Royal Navy's Mediterranean fleet was deployed in a series of task forces to the waters around Crete, keeping Axis reinforcement convoys at bay. Overnight, a group of cruisers and destroyers under Rear Admiral Irvine Glyn had successfully intercepted a convoy carrying 2,300 German mountain troops, sinking 8 transport vessels and scattering the rest northwards. As the sun rose, Allied intelligence indicated a second convoy was on its way, so another cruiser force under Rear Admiral Edward King pushed west to engage. But every minute spent north of Crete in daylight was a risk. At extremely close range at airfields across the Aegean were more than 700 Axis aircraft of General Wolfram von Richthofen's 8th Air Corps, including 268 lethal Stuka dive bombers. It did not take long for King's ship to be detected, and at 7 AM the air attacks began, with waves of Ju-88s and Dornier 17s arriving overhead from airfields near Athens. At 8:47 the British ships engaged the second Axis convoy, but the persistent air harassment made it difficult to press an effective attack. With the transport vessels retreating to the north and with each passing minute increasing the danger his ships were in, after an hour King turned away, heading to link up with the main body of the Mediterranean fleet to the west of the island. Air attacks were intensifying on the ships here as well, as they were only 20 minutes flying time away from an airfield filled with a crack unit of Stukas specialising in anti-ship bombing. Force B, led by Captain Henry Rowley, were taking the brunt of things, with the cruiser Fiji suffering a bomb hit that knocked out its anti-air gun fire control during the morning, as Rowley's ships rushed to join up with Force A1's battleships led by Rear Admiral Bernard Rawlings. By the time they got there, Fiji and her fellow cruiser Gloucester were down to 30 and 18% of their anti-air ammunition respectively. With the fleet together, Rawlings held station, intending to ride out the air attacks with safety in numbers, await King's arrival, and remain in a position where they could intervene in case any more Axis convoys were sighted to the north. Before we continue, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, Incogni. Incogni is an online platform which helps to keep your data safe by automating the process of requesting its removal from databases held by thousands of organisations known as data brokers. These groups collect and store your personal data for their own purposes, often without your consent or knowledge. This creates risks for your data, especially when it's sold on to those looking to send spam emails or phone calls, or when these data brokers get hacked, leaving your personal info in the wrong hands. If you're in the US, there's also the risk of so-called people search sites, which make personal information publicly available and searchable, making stalking and harassment easier. Incogni can get your data removed from these sites without you spending loads of time doing it yourself. I've used Incogni for a little over 2 years now, and it has removed more than 170 instances of my personal data in that time from groups who I had no idea were even holding it. You can try Incogni risk-free for 30 days, meaning if you aren't happy with the service you can get a full refund within this time, so it's worth having a go. If you use the code Historiograph60 at the link below to sign up, you can get an exclusive 60% off an annual Incogni plan. Thanks again to Incogni for sponsoring this video. But as King's ships raced southwest, from 10 AM air attacks on him intensified dramatically as large numbers of bombers arrived. Between 11:15 and 11:25, the cruiser Naiad was near missed by no fewer than 36 bombs as it furiously manoeuvred to try and avoid them. Remarkably, no direct hits were scored, but the concussion of nearby blasts damaged the cruiser's hull plating, leading to flooding in one of her engine rooms, cutting the ship's speed to 17 knots, which slowed down the entire force. Nearby, the anti-air cruiser Carlisle took a nasty hit to her superstructure, wiping out most of the bridge crew. Realising that his force was at risk of being totally destroyed, at 12:25 King signalled Rawlings, asking him to bring his fleet east to speed up their rendezvous and create some semblance of safety in numbers. Rawlings didn't hesitate and soon turned east, even though this would bring his fleet towards the narrowest part of the strait between Crete and Greece and right into the Luftwaffe's killing grounds. At 1:22 PM, King's ships were sighted, with explosions from its anti-air fire visible overhead. Force A1, with its battleships, now began to attract attention from the Luftwaffe, easing the pressure on King's ships ever so slightly. By this stage, even the Me-109 fighters in Richthofen's air corps were getting in on the act, carrying 250kg bombs to attack Rawlings' fleet. One managed to hit Warspite with 2 bombs, which exploded on the starboard side, ripping open the hull and destroying much of the ship's secondary battery on that side. A few minutes after this, the British force merged together, with Force A1 taking position astern of King to try and protect his battered ships from air attack as the fleet turned around to head southwest. A few minutes after this, the British force merged together, with Force A1 taking position astern of King to try and protect his battered ships from air attack as the fleet turned around to head southwest. Rear Admiral King now signalled Rawlings to inform him that he was assuming command of the whole group of ships. This was because while both men were Rear Admirals, King had seniority as he had been one longer, allowing him to pull rank. This decision created immediate problems as King was now commanding ships of which he knew little operationally, having no information on, for example, the ammunition levels of the ships in Forces A1 or B. This command disruption was to have swift consequences. A few minutes earlier, Rawlings had detached the destroyer HMS Greyhound to the north to sink a stray Axis transport boat from one of the convoys engaged earlier. Greyhound quickly obliged, and at 1:51 was ordered back to rejoin the fleet by King. But on the way, whilst isolated without the protection of other ships, the destroyer came under attack by 8 Stuka dive bombers. Despite Commander Walter Marshal Ledeen's best efforts to avoid, one bomber hit the ship with 2 bombs, sinking it within minutes. Observing this attack, Rear Admiral King soon dispatched the destroyers Kandahar and Kingston to cover the distance to Greyhound and pick up survivors, and then a short while later sent the cruisers Fiji and Gloucester to provide the destroyers with anti-air cover whilst the rescue was ongoing. The crew of Fiji greeted this order with despair, as unlike King, they knew how low their ship and Gloucester were on ammunition. One officer was overheard saying the orders were the equivalent of saying go back, shoot 100 of your men, drown 120 and sink your ship. It was a fateful decision. At the moment of maximum danger, King had divided his force and exposed 2 cruisers that were low on anti-aircraft ammunition to the full fury of hostile bombers with little to protect them. It was only at 2:13 PM when King asked Rawlings to provide more anti-air protection for the Force C ships that were running low on ammunition that Rawlings had a chance to inform his fellow Rear Admiral just how low the Force B cruisers were. By the time Force B had finished picking up survivors and had been ordered to return to the fleet, a sizable gap had opened up between them. Fiji, Gloucester and the 2 escorting destroyers now raced as fast as they could across the strait to rejoin the herd, as waves of dive bombers came in against them. The ships did all they could to drive off their attackers and avoid their lethal armour-piercing bombs, but steadily their anti-air barrage weakened as ammunition ran dry. At 3:27 PM, a Stuka hit Gloucester with 2 bombs, starting large fires on board. Repeated near misses damaged the hull, and soon power was lost to these ships' guns and fire control. And still the bombers came. There was no let-up as the aircraft concentrated their fire on the visibly struggling cruiser. Gloucester was soon completely out of ammunition and helpless. At 3:45 there were 3 more direct hits which set off secondary explosions deep within the ship. It soon became clear that it was time to abandon ship. Gloucester's crew lowered their boats only to discover almost all of them were totally wrecked. Seeing their fellow countrymen entering the water, Fiji came over and dropped floats for the crew to cling onto, but could not afford to stop to rescue any as they themselves would become an easy target. there would be no rescue for Gloucester's sailors. Ultimately, only 85 of her crew of 815 would survive to be picked up by the Axis and taken prisoner. It was a heavy loss for the Mediterranean fleet, and the day was far from over. As the afternoon progressed, the main British fleet continued to come under attack, but it had a comparative advantage, with many ships close together able to provide mutual defence. So the only further damage were 2 bomb hits on the battleship Valiant at 4:45 PM, setting fires which were steadily extinguished. But there was no such mutual protection for Fiji and its 2 escorts, which turned southeast at 5:30 PM, desperately trying to get away from Axis airfields as the attacks continued to roll in. Before long, Fiji too was out of anti-air ammunition and could only now rely on its manoeuvrability to avoid getting hit. 2 separate attacks by level bombers were avoided, but at 6:45 PM another attack by an ME-109 in a makeshift bombing role caught the ship's crew out, with a near miss close on the port side that buckled plates and caused flooding. Fiji began to list, and with a boiler room flooded, its speed was cut to 17 knots. Yet more bombers arrived at 7:15, and another ME-109 scored a direct hit on another boiler room. The cruiser listed and slowed further, as fires blazed amidships. The killing blow was struck by a Ju-88, which hit with 2 bombs shortly before 8 PM. At 5 past, abandoned ship was ordered. 10 minutes later, Fiji was gone, leaving hundreds in the water. Kandahar and Kingston came alongside to pick up survivors once it was dark. Among those helping men out of the water was Commander Adine, the captain of the sunken Greyhound. Seeing one man struggling, Adine jumped in to help, but was never seen again. Ultimately, 523 of Fiji's crew of 780 were pulled from the sea before at 10:45 the 2 destroyers moved off to rejoin the fleet. It was the end of a bruising day for the Mediterranean fleet. The loss of 2 cruisers and a destroyer, plus the scuttling of HMS York at Suda Bay, made May 22nd one of the worst single days for the Royal Navy of the whole war in terms of ships sunk. And the battle was far from over. The fleet would continue to try and support the troops on land in the face of total Axis air superiority, and when the battle there was lost, came back to evacuate the troops, again under intense air bombardment. But that's a story for another video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.